Welcome back, Be Good community. Today, we're going to be talking about fairness and consistency in school leadership. So, another way that we can be student centered, or that when you talk to students about administrators and what makes this administrator someone that you love, respect, or that just is good for a school, one of the other consistencies that come through are the fairness and consistency in decision making. And what do kids mean by fairness? And we don't like the word fair, but oftentimes I like that when John Wooden, the great basketball coach, had once said that when they talked to him about fairness, he said it wasn't about treating everyone the same, because in his view, not everybody was created the same. They don't have the same talents, abilities, personalities, but there was a consistency of sort of the rules applied to everybody. But in terms of how that person was supported or this and that and the other by the rules might have been different at the particular time, or how they, sort of how he dealt with that particular person when he's talking with Bill Walton versus when he's talking to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He had to be different because those were two different guys, two different time periods. However, his expectations remained the same. The rules remained the same. What one could do and what one couldn't do didn't change very much, but the approach met and catered to and the support those individual needs, and the listening was important. So when it comes to sort of this fairness, there's the importance of fairness in leadership, because students thrive when they know that the rules apply to everyone, no matter their background, no matter where they're from. This can get messy in public schools in the States, private schools in the States, the international community, but there has to be a consistency in terms of students need to feel that no one is essentially above the law or above the rules, and that we're creating a school environment where everyone feels that they're held to the same standard. And while being held to that standard, they're being treated with respect. This is key. Okay, so let's clarify a little bit before I get really into it about the balance between fairness and individuality. Okay. Now, fairness doesn't mean treating every student the same way, as I gave that example for John Wooden, but it means recognizing sort of individual circumstances when appropriate. Okay. While still maintaining the consistency of expectations. Now, this balance is difficult, 100%. I don't think anyone's perfected it, but it's one that we need to keep in mind. And I think it's helpful to keep it in mind all the time, in that holding students accountable while considering their unique situations is crucial to leadership. It's crucial to effective leadership. It's crucial to keeping humanity in our leadership. Because one of the things that we don't want to do is kind of this first thing that I want to talk about, is that there's a role for fairness, but we don't want to become the administrator who thinks that everything can be handled by just looking at the policy book, the policy manual, if you will. Because, as school leaders, we have a responsibility to make decisions with impartiality. That's completely correct. And when we apply policies and rules fairly, we're sending a message that everyone is held to the same standard. Now, this consistency builds trust, right? Builds trust with teachers. Teachers trust us, but also students, because students really do want us to hold the line, right? Whether they might not like it when they're the ones that the line has being held for, right? But they expect it, and it actually creates a safe environment. And sometimes we lose this because one of the things we don't want to do, we don't want to become draconian, right? We don't want to say, no matter what, everyone, all I do, I don't really care what the student's going through. I just apply the policy. We all get dismayed at that, right? We all, that's something that doesn't feel very humane. It also doesn't seem very wise. And even our own laws, like in most of our countries, our law codes are built so that there's different circumstances that mediate different types of offenses and consequences, right? So we do need to take in more information. But at the same point in time, sometimes we can go to the level. The scary part is that I've seen more often than not is schools go to, well, I want to take it easy on this particular kid, or I want to be compassionate for this individual kid. And when they do that, and they don't hold the kid to the same standard, and they go away from this kind of consistency of fairness, what tends to happen is that other people are wondering, well, why don't I get a break? Well, why don't I get a break? Why don't I get a break? Right? That happens. And you also, while taking it easy or attempting to be compassionate to the individual, you fail to have compassion for the whole. You create an environment that doesn't feel safe for students. Thinking that, well, I'm really helping this kid out. I'm not gonna apply the policy for this particular kid. I'm not saying don't apply it for that kid, because when you start to do that, eventually no one knows what to expect. And when no one knows what to expect, and no one knows when standards are going to be held consistently, you create an environment for everyone that is not psychologically safe. So it's important that when we apply the rules and policies fairly, we're understanding that students need to know that no one is above the rules. No one is treated differently because of who they are, where they come from. Talks about that. And they need to see decisions are made consistently so that they can trust the system, so that they can trust you as a leadership, and they feel more secure in their environment. I've seen a school where a student had over and over again broken with school policy. And the administrator had been taken to the point that there were a certain number of offenses that, the policy dictated that there be a suspension, and also that this kid might lose credit for a particular class. And the administrator had followed every step in that policy, had been in communication with parents, had been in communication with the student. And the parent had made a plea, along with their kid, apparently in the school, to the superintendent. And when the superintendent heard the parent, heard the kid, their view was, well, the kid's only 15 years old or 16 years old. So, give him a break. And the superintendent had pretty much forced the principal to not enforce the rules. And, we talked about this, and we were like, well, this could be a problem. And I assume it would be a problem going forward. And right away, almost within a month or two, the rates of this same offense being committed by other students tripled. Because in the world of WhatsApp, texting, everything else, it went around like wildfire that the principal was no longer able to enforce this particular rule, and all the person had to do was address the superintendent. And the superintendent thought to themselves they were being compassionate to that individual kid and that family, right? They heard it. But what they didn't realize is the decision they were making was going to have reciprocal effects and cause, I won't say chaos, but it caused actions that created a school environment that was much less healthy than it had been or would have been if that superintendent had supported that principal who had taken the steps necessary. Okay? And what ended up happening, of course, is that when that principal from now on was bringing kids in, some of them didn't care, but then some of them also used this idea or this particular case as a precedent of, is it really that big of a deal? Now, next is, much like that scenario, we can recognize individual needs while maintaining consistency. We can definitely do that. So there are people, like I said, who go overboard and they say, well, the way I don't even want to hear their situation because, because then it'll keep me from being fair, or I just want to apply the policy. I don't want to, and I found this with HR, departments that I've worked with in the past where we're just going to stick to policy and we're going to forget the human and human resources. You want to keep high standards, keep consistency with the policy, but you also, if we're going to have an environment where people feel safe, supported, and that they also believe that there's some humanity to this place and fairness, it's fair to hear their individual concerns. It's fair to listen to what their situation is, to see what their needs are, and we take better action. And I want to give an example here is dealing with a student. It could mean that you're offering additional support. So let's say a particular student is not showing up for class, is skipping class consistently. Well, the skipping class has a consequence. However, finding out what's going on with that student, and if that student is actually going through something where they could use some counselor support, where they could actually use a little bit of us reaching out to the parent and teaming with them, the consequence remains the same for skipping. However, we might, by listening to their individual case, there might be a way we need to support them differently than another student who had the same offense, but doesn't have the same situation. And so what it does is also it helps us we become better at supporting the individuals in our organization. And that can even be applied to teaching. But for a school administrator, also the idea that you enforce the rules, keep a high standard, but that you're willing to listen, it plays such a huge role with students feeling supported and feeling safe with their administration. Students understand that it is the administrator's job to hold the standard and keep consistency. They do. But they're usually assuming the default is that they won't be listened to. But if they're listened to, if you take into consideration their individual circumstance, even when you might have to apply the policy and put out a consequence that they do not like, they still will understand it. When their emotions die down a little bit, they might even respect it. And they have a clear idea of how it should be applied. It doesn't need to be applied with yelling. It doesn't need to be applied with malice. It's applied with understanding and with respect. And so listening to the individual case and taking it into consideration is still an aspect of consistency. Because if we do that consistently, we also become better at supporting our students, understanding their situation, but also gaining that capital and credibility with them as someone who's willing to listen and not just someone who is acting like a robot or doesn't care at all about who they are when applying our standard. Okay? Now, the next thing that I would talk about is just that when we do this, we do build a culture of trust and respect. And trust is key to any relationship, and so is respect. Giving people your trust makes them more trustworthy, and people more than anything wanted to be treated with respect, right? And when students know that they'll be treated fairly, with the attempt to do without bias or favoritism, then they feel more secure. And they're more likely, actually, to take ownership of their actions and their behavior, right? And this creates this sort of stable foundation where students are more engaged and motivated and willing to contribute positively to the community. And when you do this successfully, what you find is that the students begin enforcing the rules themselves, not through handing out suspensions or violence or anything like that. They begin enforcing by reminding each other of what they are, by modeling the holding to a standard. Because when we show that we hold the standard while doing it with humanity, while expecting this performance, consistently applying the rules no matter who it is, but at the same time, always taking into consideration how we can support this person going forward. We're not just punishing them because of who they are. We're talking about a consequence for a behavior. And what we're hoping is that behavior just stops, right? At the end of the day. Because we don't think that person is that behavior, but what we need to do is address it. And if there's other things and other ways that we can support to do that, besides just what's in the policy manual, we do that. But when we do this consistently, students trust us, they trust their school leadership, and they respect it. And they begin to also trust and respect the culture that's being established because they know that these standards are being held, and we're creating a psychologically safe environment for those students. When fairness and consistency are at the core of a school's culture, students are just more likely to respect the rules and feel invested in the community. It's 100% the case. And we're creating, this is one of the ways in which the school principal, the school leadership is creating a positive environment for students and being student focused appropriately. Student centered appropriately. This is one of the best ways to be student centered as a school leader. So be the principal or be the school leader who leads with fairness. Hold every student accountable for the same standards while recognizing their unique needs. And in doing so, you'll create a school community where trust, respect, and success can flourish. Be good.